Though the discussions on this podcast might be mystic, the language and themes can be anything but holy. On this episode, we're discussing mystic mingling and the challenge of how to squeeze in our practice when it just seems like it's impossible, and how other people help us do just that. Hey y'all, I'm Grace, and this is Mediocre Mystic, the podcast where we explore how mediocre makes the world go round and how mediocre works in mysterious ways. Thanks so much for joining me. On this episode, we're talking about how to squeeze in that practice when it just seems impossible. What if you're on vacation? What if you're in the car pickup line waiting for your children? What if you're heartbroken? What if you're stricken with grief? You see, it's not just our circumstances that can keep us from our practice. It's sometimes our own very human condition of being. When I began to write this show, I found myself a bit heartbroken and grief-stricken. Work was really piling up, and home didn't seem like a place I was spending enough time. I had really been meditating and considering this quote from Nassim Taleb for weeks. Experience is devoid of the cherry-picking we find in studies. That intrigued me, and I decided to push into that. I just sat with it for a good week. Then, this week, so many things hit. I suddenly went, oh, right, experience. In the studies, we can look at data and say, so many people did this really beneficial thing, and here's what it will do for you too. Or someone shares this amazing healing practice that did this for me, so it will do that for you too. Well, how about when the time of testing really arrives? In my own recent wrestle with this, I learned it isn't those studies that will teach us. It is indeed the experience itself. That, my friends, is coming from an Enneagram 5 who thrives on information. The studies will, of course, educate us and give us good tools to work with. However, in the words of C.S. Lewis, experience is a brutal teacher, but you learn. To my surprise, a lot of getting through it all involved a casserole and maybe a bite of cherry cobbler here and there too. If you've been listening for any amount of time, you know that I don't mean this literally, but there's a symbol for the community that shows up for you. Sometimes it's the ones you know always will be there, and sometimes it's the person you least expect that shows up. People like you, the listener, the supporter, my dear friends and family, giving me that which the studies are devoid of, the experience of compassion. Often our challenge to fit in our practice isn't solely with our circumstance, but also with the condition of our soul. When we're grief-stricken or heartbroken, this can certainly shut down our ability to care for ourselves, with our chosen practice going to the back burner. We often tend to push through and go through the motions, and we often ignore the self-care we need because it seems too hard to engage with at the moment or too time-consuming while we're prioritizing everything else above ourselves. Ahmed Hassan said, "I'll walk in the middle of the road, no more standing safely to the side." When the rubber meets the road, can we walk away from the seeming safety of the coping mechanisms on the side to the middle, where the risk is rewarded with growth and expansion? I was on vacation in the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Y'all, I've lived here my whole life and have never been. It was such an amazing adventure to do something I'd never done in my home state, and let me tell you, the Outer Banks didn't disappoint. So where's the dilemma? Well, I was having this lovely experience of perfect weather, no light pollution, which meant the stars were brilliant and plentiful, and it was my first vacation in many years without having to work at all during the time that I was there. Again, where's the dilemma? Even in the most majestic holiday, there's a lot of busyness. I was there with some close friends, which was a miracle within itself. We had planned and worked around sickness to make it all work. Then those 5 days got very full and felt very short. We all had good intentions. Each of us brought things that mattered to us to do whilst on this incredible stretch of beach. It occurred to me that we often think our practices are to be done solitary. But we all quickly realized if we didn't invite one another into these practices that mattered to us, they would fall by the wayside. So that mid-morning after breakfast, before heading to the seashore, I was making dough for dinner that evening. The kids were gaming, my wife and my friend were preparing to head to the beach. It was our third day. None of what I had wanted to practice had been done. So I finally bucked up, pulled over a bar stool close to me, pat it, and invited my friend to please read to me one of her favorite passages from the book she had brought. She invited us all into the experience. After reading, whilst my wife contemplated on the couch, the kids still gamed, and I finished my bread. My beautiful friend held space for us all. She paused and then asked us what we thought of the reading, which sparked a humorous and also tear-filled discussion among us all. I contemplated what she had shared and what the others of our little motley crew had shared all day, off and on. It filled my day with joy and purpose I hadn't expected on holiday. The next 2 days were full of an outpouring of songs and readings, playing and storytelling with one another. This was way better than any retreat. It was honest, it was vulnerable, it was silly, and it was perfectly imperfect. Just being real with people, your people, is a real practice. Now that you've heard from me, I want to hear from you. Call or text me at 980-355-9665. Email me at mediocremysticpod@gmail.com. Visit mediocremystic.com and check out the show notes for links to social media and references from this episode. On the next episode, we're discussing the balance of practices that aid in our daily spiritual maintenance. Until then, stay tuned for the messy moment of mystic in the midst of the muddled mundane.